So this is the OSEHRA VA-PALS work group meeting for April 18th, 2018. I've been working in the past too much the last week. I kept thinking it was 2017. Anyways, here's your usual reminder that we are recording this. And it looks like we don't have anybody new on, so we don't need to do that. Larry, are you about ready to show us a little bit about what you've been working on lately?
Sure. Let's see. How do I? It's been a while. How do I grab the screen?
Let's try this.
You see my screen now?
Not quite.
It says I'm the speaker.
So there should be a place where you can share application.
Share screen.
There we go.
You should have warned me it was an IQ test.
Okay.
There we go.
Yes, we see stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I've been taking a brief look at M2M Broker, which I like greatly because it opens access to the over 3,000 broker calls that have already been built in Vista without any need for her to do any program on the Vista sites. And it's a very straightforward interface, and I guess the simplest thing to do here is to show you an example. So I mentioned that one of the upsides is, of course, you can use any broker call available out there that's been distributed through the VA. One of the disadvantages, well, the other advantage I like is it's a direct call with data coming right back. One of these days we may take a look at remote data views, which is another possible avenue. It's a little more complicated and uses the HDR. So very quickly, over here on the, I will highlight it maybe because that's still easy to see highlighted. It just consists of a series of APIs that are built and are on all of the, should be on all of the Vista servers. And I will go ahead and just run it. So I'm going to copy this and go over here and just paste it. As you'll see at the top, one of the cons is that when you send over a broker call, you have to send the access and verify code of a user at the server side. So you have to know somebody over there is access and verify who has privileges to the broker call you're using. So that's one thing that we would need to talk about. That person does not have to have the @ sign or anything like that, so certainly could be a temporary user. And so first of all, it establishes a connection and then sets up the context. And the context, of course, is, let me hit the close here. The context, of course, is the entry in file 19 that contains a list of the broker calls that you might want to use. And so this context, I'm sure this is, all of you are well aware of this, context is what gives this user privileges to the RPC brokers that you might call. And the actual broker call that I'm calling, that's in 899.4, I think it is a VPR application proxy. It looks to see what divisions are there, what division you have. Then you can send a number of parameters. In this case, this requires one. It's a string and 17. And then you fire off telling it where the parameters are, and then you run the call. And once you run the call,
I would just comment, Larry, yes, the user can be whatever you want. It doesn't have to have the @ sign, but he must have the context options you're calling.
That's right, of course, Joel. And I guess when I was speaking here about the context, I should have mentioned that that's exactly right. So fortunately, many of them are the CPRS main context.
Oh, and just for the benefit of the people who don't know, the @ what they mean by that is that there's a designation for people who can actually do programming, and that's the @ designation.
Okay, that makes it a little easier. And so what has been returned here is in REQ is the information that I requested, and I requested a virtual patient record on a patient. So let me scroll up and I'll stop what was rolling. And it has returned to me.
Cool. You got an XML document back.
And you can return information in other ways too. And so it gives you the medical center. This is patient H is the one I looked up. And all of this information I'm finding over on the what's in blue over here. But it's basically the VA PALS Avicenna that Alexa set me up with so that I can call over. So I'm actually calling into Avicenna for patient 8. And George, I would like to call into yours, but we couldn't make the connection, and so there wasn't time to fix that. And then we get a much better view here. But that is obviously this is the I think the proof of concept is done. And make sure that we had this patient. I set up a lab and actually ran some labs. So I ran some glucoses. Here's the so you can see what the glucose values are. So anyway, it's actually fairly straightforward and spectacular. And of course, now that we have this, if you want to load a global with information, we could certainly write, routine that would load the global with all the information that we can pull. And you can, like I said, and then I'll quit blabbing here, you can run any of the 3,000 or so, any suitable broker calls that already exist. So you can get, almost everything that Vista has on a patient we can pull with this. So.
Larry, I put a link in the chat. I don't know if everybody can see it. And that'll show the XML document you just pulled. That'll show it on the browser screen.
Cool. Let's take a peek here.
So it gets the same XML. It doesn't use your interface, but it uses
Not
the
that
same.
One. Not that link.
Oh, not this one.
No, it's in the WebEx chat, I think. George, maybe you could Skype it too. Awesome.
Okay. You're right. I just tried to join again. Here we go. Here we go. Nice.
Ah.
And I mean, it was clear I was calling over just to make sure I changed the age of this patient on the Avicenna that I have access over here, and also his glucose levels. And so, yeah.
This is lovely.
So,
hey, this is Dominic. Can I just ask a quick question? You mentioned earlier that it seems like you're using a user account on the other system here, and that could be was it a shared or a system account or something like that? Do you envision any issues that VA is going to have when we turn this over to OIT of using shared accounts?
Somebody else, Rick or somebody better prepared to answer that.
Yeah, what we're demoing here isn't. We're not trying to say that all the pieces of this are the way that they will eventually end up. We're trying to demonstrate that we got the M2M broker working. And one of the things that we'll want to do, you're right to raise the question, one of the things that we'll want to do is think about what is the most secure method from not just from a VA perspective, but from our perspective, about passing information back and forth. Like, for example, access and verify codes are being passed into clear. That's something we'll want to deal with. And then there's the question of, what is the user account that we'll be accessing? I mean, in a perfect world, the user who is the user on our system would also have a user account on the Vista system, and they would be connecting via that. But in practice, we don't have their access and verify code on our system. So we have to think about how we want to handle that. There might be some way. I mean, how we solve that problem depends upon how we give them access to our application. If we try to have them go directly into our web application through a sign-on, that's very different than if we're being launched out of the tools menu of CPRS. And so the actual solution for how we connect the dots to get to the gateway between the two systems is going to vary depending on things that we haven't decided yet. So, good question. Don't have an answer for you yet. We have piles of answers, but it's kind of moot until we sort out the exact mechanism.
I would comment that this mechanism is already in use at the VAs. Frequently it's used for basically, system type information moving back and forth between systems. It also has been used for like imaging and such, so it's not something that the VA is not already doing on their systems. There are times when you may have, for example, a specific user set up, and I'm not sure, Rick, would have to go back and check, but I'm not sure that the access and verify codes are normally passed in the clear on this. I mean, I think that they're at least encoded as the VA does with other stuff. But I would argue then, of course, that everything else on the line should be encoded, encrypted, or whatever as well. But and the other thing is that there are other mechanisms for accessing the visitor accounts or whatever that are used by a number of packages in similar ways. As Rick has mentioned, I think that this is in some ways a much better way to do it, where you have one server talking to the other server directly if you have absolute control over it. And that's the key there. And so, the visitor access is primarily a GUI type access that, that an application signs in as a visitor from a given site, and then it checks back with that original site, to make sure that the user can sign in there that he specified to be. But that has been used too widely in some cases, and so the MDM broker, in many ways, is the better choice. Yes.
We just want to think about how to make it as secure as possible from a user management perspective. For example, if say we're talking about Phoenix hypothetically as the Vista system that we're connecting to, and let's say it's Pee-wee who's the nurse navigator actually using our system. What we would ideally like to see is that if someone turns on auditing of access to remote procedures, we would want to see Pee-wee being logged as the person who was running these things. I mean, from a security officer standpoint, I'm sure that's what my ISO friend would say. It may be that the typical workaround in the VA today is to have an application pseudo user with its own access and verify code sign in and so forth, so that they can do system level accesses. But if they're doing that, then they're also thwarting kind of what the ISO's intentions are. So we've got a number of trade-offs, and what we need to do is kind of think about, and not yet. First, we're just trying to get the M2M broker working, and huzzah, congratulations. But one of the things that I'm going to be scratching my head about, and maybe Joel will be too, a couple of us will be thinking about what is the ideal security handling mechanism here, and how do we go about pulling that off?
The other thing that you need to remember is not just auditing of access to a particular RPC or something like that, but HIPAA.
Right.
Anytime, I mean, you're playing with medical data, And so anytime you access it, theoretically, they are actually recording who is accessing that user's data. And so it actually would be much, much better if the connection you have is in fact a particular user going to that same user on the other system. That's one of the things that the visitor access did do, although some people tried to get around it, was they actually had the visitor's name as the actual user of that system too. So, but yes, you have to remember that things should be regulated with respect to HIPAA recording as well.
That's right. Yeah, so that the privacy officer at each hospital is going to be very interested in that. So both the security officer and the privacy officer are going to be very interested in how we go about solving this problem. I mean, one thing that we could do is arrange to have the user set up a Vista user account on our VA PAL server that's basically the same as the one that they have on the other environment, right down to access and verify code. One thing that doesn't solve is, you know, we use a one-way hash these days for saving the access and verify code in the global. So if our code has to be able to retrieve that access and verify code and unhash it and send it across in order for the M2M access to work, that's going to be problematic. But I have some thoughts about that. It's not a showstopper. It's something that we can come up with a solution to. And I'm with Joel, too, about eventually we would like to arrange to do encrypted transmission of information between the VA PAL server and, say, Phoenix, so that somebody couldn't intercept the message and read the access and verify code into clear. One question that we'll run into will be if we're not allowed to change the broker on the Vista side to upgrade it to match what we're doing, then that means we have to stick within the current mechanisms that the broker currently supports in the VA. But anyway, we'll figure it out.
Thanks. One other question. I'm just curious, actually. What's the underlying network architecture for how this data is transferred with the broker? Is it like SSL or HTTP or something else? Or is it proprietary?
Joel wants to tackle this because this is an area of keen interest to him.
Well, yes, it is. And within the VA, they have gone to almost exclusively, supposedly, the use of SSH for their connections with respect to Telnet. They've replaced it with SSH. There are still some potential problems with that, but other than that, the VA basically depends upon, gee, we are inside of a network which is ours. So, of course, we're clear. You know, okay, nobody, they presumed, would ever have a sniffer on it. Nobody would. And so, yes, huge amounts of data in the past have been passed without any encoding, encryption, or anything else. But like I say, over the last 4 years, 5 years at most, they have gone to where the Telnet connections have been largely replaced with SSH connections. And so, and using those, you know, yes, there you, in that case you have a secure connection. My concern has always been others, users outside of the VA, which do not necessarily have the SSH or whatever. And so that's one of my concerns. But yes, SSH is, excuse me for one moment there. Originally, we were told that if we worked with security inside of our code, and I'm speaking now with respect to the broker code, that we would be fired. However, Wally Fort and I, years ago, worked with the SSH connection and then got it into the broker and on the server side without people knowing we were doing it largely. And so that we did support, by the time that the VA started to go to SSH, we had been supporting that for 5 years or better. And so it was an easy transition with respect to the connections out of the broker server and broker client. But that has only been recently that's been happening. And I remember security people at the hospitals, one of them put a sniffer on the line and called an immediate big meeting of, high-level security people and all the top person that on the programming side could say is, yes, we've been arguing this for years. What you need to do is talk to, the people in terms of the network and the security, because they've promised it would be secure, and it wasn't. And so finally, yes, they've gone to SSH as the primary mechanism for telnet connections. Telnet type connections have been replaced with SSH.
Thanks for the explanation, Joel. I appreciate it. The thinking that if it's an internal network, it's secure enough is kind of a old way of thinking, I guess, because if you talk to any of those ISOs now, they'll say that 70% of all intrusions are internal.
Right.
So I'm glad to hear that at least it's starting to move over to an SSH connection at least.
Yeah, we're all so happy they made that transition.
It's good.
These are great questions, Tom.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, time to stop sharing.
Sure. I can share instead. I think we.
How hard would it be, Larry? How hard would it be to demo the HMP patient lookup thing?
I can do it very quickly if you would like.
Yeah, because that's the one we'll be using first, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well.
That's a great idea.
I'm excited you got the VPR working. That's terrific. Because once we have the DFN of the patient, we'll be able to pull that and get a bunch of stuff.
Rather than put it by hand, keep us all waiting. Okay. Is this the? Oh no, this is the example.
Right.
Yeah, just a minute. I'm sure I have that too. Patient 8. Here we go. So it's exactly the same thing. It's just using a different context and a. If I close it, okay.
Nice.
And of course, as you know, I did by name and put in some characters, but you can put in last 5. There's any number of ways that you can pull a patient, and it will bring up the information that this broker call pulls back.
Outstanding.
Yeah, they all work that well. I really like it. Understand the problems, but it's a great way to just pull up any old broker call on the other side. So, all right.
So we might want to explain this a little bit more for the people who haven't seen things like this before. Like, as far as I can tell, it looks like you tried to look up EIGH for your
That's
patient.
right. So, yeah, when you turn it in, you turn in the values, the type of value and the value for each one of the input variables required by the broker. And in this case, it only requires one. It's a string, and EIGH. And I lied, by the way. There's two. There's, of course, first I said look up by name, and then I said, and the name starts with EIGH. And instead of name here, I could have put last five. There's a number of things you could put. In which case, you know, I would put E and where's their SSN here?
I don't think it's
anyway. I could have put E in the last 4 digits of their SSN, and it would have then picked up probably only a single patient. Actually, that's a pretty good lookup. The last 5.
Oh, you can see the value right there. E7654 is the, and that's the BS5. It's right there in the node you got back in RecSub 2, or E777.
Oh, right. There you are. Thank you, Rick.
So what they're doing is, for security, they're blanking out the first 5 of the SSN and just giving us they're replacing them with asterisks and just giving us back the final 4 in the node. You can see that.
Now, would we be able to keep the session open and do multiple inputs from the user on the screen, do you think, or not? Or we have to reopen it each time?
Yes.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty sure that you can. You can also, when you leave the connection open, you can also change, you can change the context as well. I haven't tried that, so I should try it before we demo it. But yes, George, I believe you can.
Yes, you can.
That would require us to have a session with the browser, I guess, and that's not probably something we want. So we should try it first by opening and closing each time, because that way we can just do a regular REST call from the browser to trigger it.
Right. I was thinking the same thing, and I'm sure we could. So I was thinking about using the data we get to fill the database or a global, in which case we could make calls to several. You know, there could be a routine on our side, on the client side, that calls a number of broker calls, and each time then fills in what we want with the data and then calls another. And once the connection's made, I am sure that's possible. But I'll try it just to make sure.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I guess we could have a background job running to do this, and have REST calls coming in from the browser that basically pass over the query to the job running that has an open session. I don't know exactly how. Because otherwise, you know, because with the browsers, when you're typing things into the sort of input box in the browser, and then triggering a REST call into the server, that's independent of it. It's not a session. It's just an individual transaction. So we could try it. You know, we could try it both ways. It will be quicker, obviously, if we could have an already open session. If we could leave an open session, and as the user changes their input, we just call the RPC again with the new input. But I'm not sure how to make that happen with the browser. Yeah.
The other thing we can do is, since we are up to date with GTM, we can put some timing information in here and find out which of these calls is consuming the most time.
Yeah.
And that'll tell us something about what could be gained by trying the different approaches.
Right. Yeah, that's a good idea.
So okay.
That's really great, Larry. This is going to be really cool.
I have another suggestion to make, because you're talking about whether to leave this session open or not. We might want to talk to LCAP and the nurse navigators and just find out how often do they want to look up a patient after a patient after a patient, multiple patients in a row, and how often do they just look up one patient and then go fill out forms for that one patient, because that might make a difference in how we handle it.
I was thinking more of having multiple calls in order to be able to look up one patient. So if you type E, for example, and you get you get 50 different things, and then you want to refine it, so you say ER, or you change the input on the screen to look up the same patient is what I'm kind of thinking of. Not that you go to another patient, but that you have multiple inputs to look up a single patient.
From what they're telling us, though, they use last 5 almost exclusively, so I don't know how often that will happen either.
Okay, yeah, because last 5 should get us to one patient, probably.
Yeah, it's almost always unique. In the VA, all the VA people almost exclusively do use, she's right, use the BS5.
One concern about BS5 or even the EIGH is that if you do a fileman lookup and there is an ambiguity, you have to figure out a way to know that because the ambiguity will fail.
It depends on which call you do. We're not doing find one of DIC. We're doing find of DIC, so it can handle ambiguity and return multiple results. Like what he's got here, where he's got 2 different patients that match, they would both then be presented in the patient lookup window in the browser, and the user could pick which one they wanted.
Is this one of those situations where they could type in like number 1 or the number 2 to pick whichever patient they wanted?
I believe it's just going to be a mouse click, Linda. They will click on the one they want.
Okay, cool.
I think that's right.
Any other questions about this?
Great work, you guys. This is coming along beautifully.
Oh. But it looks like Ricardo is on, but his mic is not working properly. So, Ricardo, if you have any questions. Okay. Says he'll call in shortly. So, do we want to then move on to the feedback we got on the forums, or we want to do something else?
Feedback sounds great.
Okay. Just a moment.
Yes.
We can hear Ricardo now, I think.
You can hear me now?
Yeah, that's Ricardo. Hi.
All right. Well, I was just trying to say earlier that somebody, I don't know who, but somebody mentioned that we should speak with the LCAP people regarding feedback on, I forget what it was, something. And now I think the project is, I think that's good, but the project is now transitioning to be much more VA-centric. So individuals like Pee-wee out at Phoenix are much more, are going to provide a lot more feedback, because the people like Angel and others over at LCAP, they can help, but they're not living in the VA world. So we're going to want to probably lean more on Pee-wee and others, hopefully from other VA sites. That was the only thing I was trying to get in there.
Excellent point. Thank you.
Okay. So, Ricardo went and talked to the LCAP folks about mainly the intake and, well, the home page, the intake page, and I think the background page.
Well, we tried to go through all the forms, but this is the comments you have here as far as we got.
Okay. So we just kind of wanted to share a little bit of the kind of feedback we got, I think. So
you could also show the document. You show a page down the document. It's an interesting way of he captured all of the forms in a landscape format and put it into a document. I think that's interesting. So you might want to might want to scroll down and show how the forms are. You know, what's in this document. This is basically a top-down capture of the entire application and all the forms that's here.
Yeah.
So I think it would be worth showing people.
All right. Well, so yes, this is where the nurse navigator would start at this point. This is different than where they would start with the classic LCAP at the moment, because that has much more stuff on the page actually. But here we're just locating patients, either starting to create a new case or looking up one that you've already started. And I believe that we were talking about the new case is, for VA, is only going to be able to allow people who are already in VISTA. So you won't be putting anybody in here who isn't already in VISTA. And then from there, it usually takes us to what we're calling the case review page, where it shows all of the existing forms that we have for that particular patient and their status, if it's relevant. And then the intake form. This is the first form that they fill out for the patient. And whenever they make contact with the patient, pretty much, they come back to this form. And they include notes about their contacts and anything else that they need about the patient. And I was told yesterday, I believe, that a lot of times what the nurse navigators do is, instead of like trying to go through and fill out fields as they're talking to the patient, they'll put all the information in the note field, and then when they're done talking with the patient, they'll distribute that information into the fields that they belong into.
That's interesting. That makes sense, because then they're not searching for fields. They can just type as they think.
Exactly. Exactly. That's what I thought. And then it will save those so that it comes back up next time you open the form. This is the usual stuff that they might not want. And then is the background form. This is where they have more information about, like, the patient demographics and their smoking status, basically the information that's going to be needed to make the CT order, I believe. This is medical history. Lots of yes, no's. And then smoking history. So you can see that background form is pretty extensive. The CT evaluation form, as I understand it, is for the radiologist, maybe with the help of the nurse navigator, to fill out to indicate the results of a CT scan, including kind of nodule demographics, you might call them, the factors that indicate like where the nodule is and how big it is, and stuff like that. And patient symptoms. And this actually goes on for 9 landscape pages, so it's pretty comprehensive. One of the other things that happens during CT scans is they don't just find nodules in the lungs, because the CT scan shows other parts of the body, like parts of the stomach, and it shows the heart, and for women it shows the breasts, and they may find other abnormalities in those other parts of the CT scan, and those are all captured in this form as well. Follow-up form, what they do afterwards. I believe this is the one that indicates, right, what has happened since the last time they were in and had their CT scan. And that's what we have in here. Any questions that I probably won't be able to answer on these forms? Okay. So we did get a little bit of feedback from the ILCAP folks. For example, here they want the height and weight to come from VISTA instead of the nurse navigator inputting them.
This feedback was largely from, I think, the VA folks, not the LCAP folks.
It was a combination.
A combo. Okay, good.
Yeah, actually, that's the best way. I mean, if you ask directly LCAP now, you'll get the traditional LCAP answer usually. Now we really need to have SAM and PWE and other VA sites now start weighing in. With Claudia basically there, so she can override if need be, but
or maybe explain the thinking behind whatever it is.
Right, but there's a lot of VA-centric kind of basically modifications we need to make that we need those extra voices in there. So.
Right, right. I know that one of the issues has been how dates are represented, and unsurprisingly, the VA folks want the dates in the format that they're used to.
So show the stickies, Linda. Show the stickies.
Oh, well,
show the stickies. Show them all.
Okay, yeah, this just has to do with the patient lookup, what we were just talking about previously, and they want to be able to use the VA style last name plus last four of Social Security type lookup. Now, we have it set up currently so that whenever there's a new case or they bring up a patient over here, an existing patient, it goes to the case review page. But this is a change where they want all new cases to instead go to the intake form instead of the new case, instead of the case review page, which makes sense to me. And for some reason, this one isn't showing right now. Ah, there we are. Right. So we were talking about showing the version number of the software on the screen. I believe that's partly so that we know which version particular feedback is referring to. This is regarding date, I believe. Yep. Instead of other study ID, they would like facility number. And they want Social Security number instead of MRN because that's what I believe VA still uses, is Social Security number as the MRN.
Linda, on the previous question, I'm sorry, the previous comment about rather than other study ID, they want a different number. So the way it works is when you put a patient in, they're assigned a temporary study ID. And then if they're accepted into the study, then they get their permanent study ID. And my understanding was that the other study ID field was to capture their temporary ID after they get their permanent ID so that there's still a record of it.
No, that's not right. I understand why that would make sense, but that's not actually how they intended to use the field. They were using the field when a patient was part of this study from a different site. And since the prefixes on the study IDs are site-specific, if they were at first at Swedish Hospital in Seattle and then they were at Mount Sinai in New York, when you're doing the update, you might want to have access to the Swedish Hospital ID as well as the Mount Sinai ID. And in the VA, this is one of the issues we're going to have to deal with is patient mobility. Because especially Phoenix is an excellent first site for this because there's a huge number of snowbirds among veterans who travel south for the winter, and Phoenix knows that better than any other hospital since they get slammed by this massive increase in population. So a lot of the patients that they see are going to have been at some other site, not at first when they're the only one, but down the road when we start to bring on, Houston and Prescott and other sites, especially sites up further to the north, then they might start entering patients who were seen at one of these other sites first, and that's what that field would be used for. In fact, the current design may be extremely optimistic from a VA perspective. It may well be that a veteran might be at many sites. And that eventually we'll have to upgrade this form to be able to represent a real multiple there.
So I'm not sure if you mentioned it earlier. I had to step away for a few minutes, but all these items in the PDF I did start putting into our instance of JIRA. And for this one in particular and a few others that we need some more clarification on, currently they're assigned to Rick Avila to get some of that more clarification here, because I think that study ID, the previous study ID or other, is still valid, and maybe we just want to add a facility number. I think hopefully Rick will be the champion for us to get the answers to some of these questions.
I will go investigate, but if my recollection is correct, they wanted to get rid of other study ID here and replace it with.
Yeah, but the question is, do they understand the repercussions of removing it completely and
probably not.
Something else?
I will go find out.
Right.
That would be great. Because yeah, I suspect once they understand it, they'll agree eventually it's going to have to be expanded into a multiple.
Okay, is that all about that particular?
Hold on a second. I just have a question about that.
Go for it.
My understanding is that when a veteran moves, I would say not moves, but when a veteran shows up in Phoenix and they had been spending the summer in Washington, for example, that the Phoenix will create a copy of their record down in Phoenix. So from Phoenix's point of view, do they need to know that the veteran was from Washington?
So imagine a scenario. Well, there's a couple of answers to this question. One answer is that whatever the VA hospital does in Vista is separate from the question of, well, how do we accomplish the same thing on our standalone server? So, are we going to have one server per site?
Back up. You're saying we're going to do a standalone server. That's not a given yet.
Well, exactly. It's not a given. We're trying to solve both at the same time. We're trying to make sure that we come up with solutions that can handle both scenarios. Go ahead.
I would just say that there are mechanisms by which a user can pull up the information for a particular patient across basically all of the VA. It does not have to have the data moved to their site, no. But they normally, if a it had gotten to the point pretty well where if a patient was scheduled for the next day, an awful lot of the references, at least to the other sites that he had been seen at, were prepared so the physician would be able to pull up any data from any of those sites.
And are we talking about remote data views, or are you thinking of something else as the mechanism?
And part of it would be remote data views, and but yeah, but I know that they had mechanisms for, without having the data moved to their site, being able to basically view any of the data they wanted across the country.
Yeah, and see, that's the challenge, Ricardo, is that the typical scenario is that the patient's record remains fragmented at multiple sites, and we point the physicians and the users to the fact that the data is there, and we give them the remote data views and other kinds of software to let them look at the data at the other sites, but they're still separate. And it's easy to see kind of why this hasn't been turned into a just push all the data together at the new site problem. If you think about a patient who is at Phoenix, and now he has a patient record, and then he goes up to, say, Boston, because it's summer, and they're looking at the Phoenix data, but they're entering a new record on the Boston system for this patient with a different patient file number and so forth. So it could have a completely different ID, and then they go back to Phoenix, and now Phoenix is getting new data, but they're also using remote data views to read the data on the Boston system and compare it with what they've got locally. So it's the normal scenario in the VA that they're having to keep track of how many different sites the patient's at, and to have the user be smart enough to look at the different locations, even if there's some advanced prep work done to kind of point them in that direction. What isn't done is sort of merging it all together, because there's not a good answer to the question about how you merge this data. Patient merge in the VA has been focused on, if at Phoenix you accidentally create two different records for the same patient, then you can merge that. And it's still an incredibly difficult process. But at least if you're on the same system, all your internal identifiers match, which makes the merge doable. If the record you're trying to merge is data from Boston using all of Boston's internal IDs, different pointer values, and so forth, and different drug names, and then a record in Phoenix, it becomes an extremely complicated problem, and I think that's mostly why the VA has dodged it to date.
The good news is that for our VA PALS application, we've designed it much as the LCAP is designed to be forms-based, and the forms are identified by a study ID and a date in a form type, it would be an easy matter if you had two VA PALS systems in different parts of the country, and they were going to treat the same patient, to have all the forms for that patient in both places.
Yeah. No, that's a very good point. Is it's easier for us to merge than it is for regular Vista records to merge.
We built this so merging is absolutely part of the plan.
Yeah.
It's not part of our first deliverable, but it's designed so that if you wanted to merge, which means if you wanted to have multiple VA PALS systems that would treat that might both have to treat the same patient, you could have all of their forms in both systems.
Right.
So our preference is to keep other study ID and add facility number. Is that what I heard earlier?
Yes. Yeah. I think the matter of merging patients it ought to be a system matter and not a matter that is dictated by the actions of the user.
Right.
And do we need more than one other study ID? If someone's in a metropolitan area, could they go to multiple VAs?
Oh yeah, they can and they do.
So is one other study ID enough?
No.
Well, you'll find that some veterans will hit a dozen hospitals.
Ultimately, we can make that field a multiple. So
yeah,
as many study IDs as we want.
I think that's the ultimate solution.
To hundreds of them.
All right. Well, I will ask if we want the system to look that way with a variable number of other study IDs.
I wonder, so it sounds to me
probably
like
what it would look like. Sorry, Linda, I didn't mean to step on you.
Oh, that's okay.
I just wanted to point out probably what it would look like is that there would still just be one box.
Yeah.
But when you click on the box, you might get a pop-up or something that would help you get those other study IDs. But we don't want to clutter up the form. I just want to make sure that we're clear. We're not proposing to clutter up the form with a whole bunch of blanks.
Right.
Yeah, I got it. It's just like addresses we're about to talk about.
So my impression from the way LCAP is currently run is that the study ID is connected with the study location. So
That's right.
if a person moves from one LCAP location to another LCAP location, does that mean that they would have two study IDs?
That's right. That's right. Because before the number comes the prefix, and the prefix is the alpha identifier. And in the VA, we're going to be using the coding system that the VAs use for their own hospitals, like PHX for Phoenix.
And so, is that the way they want it? Is my other question. Do they want to have the person have more than one study ID, or do they just want them to keep the same study ID, and it'll kind of be the location then will be related to where they started in the study?
It would be, if we tried to make it so that it was a single study ID no matter what, it would mean that every VA PAL system would have to know about the existence of every other VA PAL system, and anytime you touch that field, it would have to probe across the VA network to all those other hospitals and check and see if anybody's been there. So I don't think we want to try to enforce a single study ID from a performance perspective. I'm pretty sure that's why LCAP didn't do it either.
Okay. Okay, yeah, it just occurred to me.
No, it's a good question. And someday, with a much faster network, maybe in 10 years, those sorts of things could be doable.
You could fetch every night the other study ID, the study IDs of all systems, and have it locally available for performance reasons.
Right. Right, and that wouldn't take 10 years to get to. That's something we could do in the next year, but not for the first version.
Right.
Yes.
That's a good idea. I'm actually sitting here digesting what you said. I like that.
Commonly done. It's a standard thing.
Yeah. Nice architecture, Ricardo.
Yep. So we are running out of time. I believe, so there's the multiple addresses comment. They're going to be removing the mother's first name and last name, and father's first name. I think that might have been a location registration specific thing.
So can we pick this up next week?
Yeah, there's like one more.
Okay.
So, and this is, we already talked about this one, height and weight from Vista. Oh, and I think there was one on the CT evaluation form. Wanted a different name and an imaging facility number. So, anyways, any other pressing questions before we get off this call? Lovely. We'll see y'all next week then.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a good one.
Interesting call.
Thank you.
Guys.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thanks.